In 1953, a Lancaster County dairy farmer named Amos Stoltzfus bought a 90-acre farm in Pennsylvania for $14,000. He paid cash. He was 31 years old, had 8 children, no electricity, and no checking account at any bank. The money came from a wooden box buried under the floorboards of his father's milk house. 3 generations had been filling that box since 1871. When Amos died in 2004, the box held $186,000. None of it had ever earned interest. None of it had ever needed to. The Amish do not borrow. They have not borrowed for almost 200 years. And the rules that made that possible were never written in any book the English were allowed to read. They lived differently, not because they were behind the times, but because they refused to enter them. While the rest of America financed cars, homes, and educations on debt that compounded for 40 years, the Amish stayed cash. We called it stubborn. We called it backward. We are now the most indebted civilization in human history, and they are not. The rules that kept them out of the trap were quiet, communal, and almost invisible to outsiders. Number 19 on this list is the reason no Amish family has ever filed for bankruptcy in recorded American history. Number 11 saved the average young man $22,000 before his wedding day and cost nothing to implement. And number 3, the single rule the bishop enforced more strictly than any other, is why an Amish farmer in 2024 can still buy a farm in cash while his English neighbor cannot make the mortgage on a tract house. These 25 rules were not about being plain. They were about being free. Free from the bank, free from the lender, free from the slow erosion of a man who owes more than he owns. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 secret old-fashioned money rules the Amish have followed since the 1850s that kept every family debt-free for life. Number 25, the barn raising bank. When a family needed a new barn, the community built it in a single day. You sent word to the bishop on Wednesday. By Saturday, 300 men arrived at sunrise. A 1957 raising in Holmes County drew 312 men for $1,400 in materials. An English contractor quoted $9,200. For a young father who had just lost his barn to lightning, the day was a community telling him in hammer strokes that he was not alone. The practice has not stopped since 1737. The barn was a savings account paid in calloused hands. Number 24, the cash-only rule. No Amish family carries a credit card. Not in 1955, not in 2024. You walked into the shop with bills in a leather pouch and walked out with what those bills could buy. A young couple in 1962 saved 7 years before buying their first buggy. They borrowed from his father in the meantime. They felt patient, not poor. The rule was codified in district ordnungs in the 1880s when traveling salesmen first brought installment plans to Lancaster County. It was the refusal to mortgage the future to flatter the present. Number 23, the bishop's veto. Before any major purchase, a man consulted the bishop. You sat at his kitchen table. He asked 3 questions. Can you pay cash? Will it weaken your family? Will it weaken the community? A farmer in 1971 who wanted a second farm was told no. He died debt-free in 1998. His neighbor, who bought against counsel, lost both farms in the 1982 crisis and moved to Indiana in shame. The bishop was a brake on a man's own enthusiasm. Number 22, the Mutual Aid Fund. The Amish carry no commercial insurance. Every family puts $30 in the deacon's hand at the end of each church service. He records it in a black ledger. A typical Lancaster district in 1985 held $40,000 and never filed a single claim form. For a young mother whose son was born with a heart defect in 1979, the fund was the certainty that 200 families had already paid her bill before her son was born. The system has run continuously since 1881. It was a promise the neighbors had prepaid. Number 21. The hand-me-down economy. You sewed a boy's church suit in 1968. 4 brothers wore it across 8 years. It was retailored twice, then cut into a work shirt, then into quilt squares that still sit on a bed in Gap, Pennsylvania. A family of 9 in 1974 spent $32 a year on clothing, a tenth of what English families spent. The mother who sewed that first suit died in 2009. The quilt outlived her. The shirt was still doing arithmetic on its third owner. Number 20. The auction discipline. You sat on a folding chair for 6 hours, paddle in hand, and did not raise it until the price made sense. A $340 kitchen table went for $42 at a Strasbourg auction in 1979. A $1,800 breeding cow sold for $640 at Mount Hope. For a grandmother who had attended the same Tuesday auction since 1948, the bidding floor was a classroom where her grandsons learned the price of patience. The auction was patience with a paddle in its hand. In 1958, Bank of America issued the first general-purpose credit card. Within 20 years, the average American family carried 6 of them. The Amish carried 0. By 2024, the average American household carries $104,000 in total debt. The average Amish household carries less than $2,000. We earned more. They kept more. The difference was never the paycheck. The difference was a code that refused to let the paycheck leave faster than it arrived. Number 19. The no-mortgage inheritance. When a father transferred a farm to his son, he did not sell at market rate. You signed a single sheet of paper at the kitchen table. A 1962 transfer in Lancaster was recorded at $8,000, a third of market value. The son owned it free by 1970. For an aging father, the transfer was a refusal to let the bank stand between his son and the land his grandfather had cleared in 1849. No Amish family has filed for bankruptcy in recorded American history. The farm was handed down with the debt removed first. Number 18. The one-buggy rule. A family owned 1 buggy, not 2. You scheduled the week around it. A 1981 buggy cost $1,800 and lasted 40 years. The English family next door cycled through 9 cars in the same period at a combined cost above $90,000. For a father of 7, the rule was a calendar that forced the family to coordinate and stay close. It traces to the 1862 Dordrecht reaffirmation that material multiplication weakens spiritual unity. The buggy was a decision made once and honored for a generation. Number 17. The wood stove economy. Amish homes heat with wood from the family woodlot. You sharpened the saw Sunday evening. You felled trees Monday. Cost per winter in 1976 was $40 for blade sharpening. An English oil furnace that winter cost $890 in fuel. For a 12-year-old boy holding one end of a crosscut saw with his father, the October woodlot was where he learned that warmth was something a family produced, not something a utility delivered. The stove was a forest the family had been managing since 1893. Number 16. The garden that fed 12. A half-acre kitchen garden fed the household. You planted in April and canned through September. In 1970, a family of 12 in Holmes County grew 80% of their food from that garden. Estimated savings, $1,400 a year. The wife had not bought a seed packet since 1948. For her, the cellar was 22 years of accumulated knowledge in mason jars, which tomato survived 1962, and which bean held through the drought of 1966. The garden was a grocery store the family had built into the ground. Number 15, the no insurance health rule. You walked into billing with the bishop and the deacon. You laid an envelope of cash on the desk. A 1989 surgery billed at $14,000 was paid by an Amish family for $6,200. The cash, no insurance discount. The aid fund covered $4,000. The family paid the rest over 18 months. For the father, whose daughter had just survived appendicitis, the bill was proof his community could meet a crisis without a single insurance company touching his family's name. The bill was the hospital recognizing a payer who would not vanish. Number 14, the hand-sharpened tool. An Amish farmer in 1955 owned roughly 14 hand tools and sharpened them every Sunday evening. You sat on the back porch with a whetstone and the day's last light. A scythe, properly maintained, lasted 40 years. Replacement cost avoided across a working life was $1,200. For a grandfather sharpening the same scythe his father had sharpened in 1898, the Sunday hour was a conversation across 3 generations, conducted in the soft scrape of stone on steel. The tool was a relationship the man honored every week with a stone. Number 13, the Sunday money refusal. No Amish business operates on Sunday. No selling, no buying. You closed Saturday at 6 and did not reopen until Monday. A 1972 study estimated the refusal saved the average household $260 a year in impulse purchases. For a young man tempted by a Sunday flea market in 1985, the closed shop was a fence his great-grandfather had built around his wallet in 1881 that still held. The observance traces to the Schleitheim Confession of 1527. Sunday was a fence around the wallet. Number 12, the bulk buy network. Families pool grocery orders. By Friday, one woman drove a hired van to the bulk store in Lititz with 12 families' lists: 400 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of sugar, 80 pounds of salt. Cost per pound dropped 40%. A typical district in 1988 saved $3,200 a year. For the widowed grandmother who organized the route for 31 years before her death in 2003, the trip was the quiet conviction that 12 families buying together would always eat better than 12 buying alone. It was a cooperative running quietly out of a buggy. Number 11, the apprenticeship wage. Boys leave school at the end of 8th grade and apprentice with a father or uncle. You worked sunup to sundown for 6 years. You earned $20 a week in 1985, $80 a week in 2020, and spent almost none of it. By marriage age, an Amish young man has saved $14,000 to $30,000. He buys his first farm or shop in cash. For a 21-year-old at his own wedding in 1991 with $22,000 in a coffee tin, the apprenticeship was the down payment on a life, assembled one $20 envelope at a time. The apprenticeship was a down payment being assembled in plain sight. Number 10, the make-do repair. When something broke, you fixed it. A failed 1968 washing machine engine was rebuilt for $8 in parts. A 1991 cracked buggy wheel was respoked for $14. The lifetime savings amounted to $40,000 in modern dollars. For a father teaching his son to disassemble a hay rake on a Saturday morning in 1974, the broken machine was not a problem. It was the curriculum. The harness shop on Route 340, opened in 1923, has repaired wheels for 4 generations of the same family. The repair was the refusal to accept a manufacturer's verdict. In 2007, a Penn State economist spent 18 months studying Amish household finance. He expected to find the no-debt rule produced lower quality of life. He found the opposite. Amish families reported higher financial security, lower stress, and stronger family relationships than any comparison group. His final paper contained one sentence the academic community ignored. The Amish appear to have solved a problem the rest of the American economy has not. He never received funding for a follow-up. The findings made too many lenders nervous. Number 9. The quilt income. Amish women earned quiet, separate income from quilting. You stitched in the evenings after the children slept. In 1979, a quilt sold for $340. Materials cost $28. The cash went into a coffee tin in the bedroom closet, untouched by household expenses. A skilled quilter built a private fund of $4,000 to $8,000 across a working life. For a grandmother who paid for 3 grandchildren's hospital births from her tin between 1982 and 1991, the fabric was a woman's voice in the family's finances, in the only language the Ordnung allowed. The quilt was a woman's silent economy, stitched one square at a time. Number 8. The land first rule. When a family had money to invest, they bought land. Not stocks, not bonds. Land. You walked the boundary. You paid cash at the courthouse. An acre of Lancaster farmland in 1955 cost $400. The same acre in 2024 is worth $18,000. For a father who inherited $3,000 in 1958, the choice was the conviction his great-grandfather had carried off the boat from Switzerland in 1737. That wealth printed on paper could vanish, but wealth a man could walk across could not. The dirt was a bet on the only thing that could not be printed. Number 7. The no-phone refusal. Until the 1990s, no Amish home had a telephone. You walked to the phone shanty at the end of the lane. You wrote letters for everything else. Annual savings in 1985 were $180. The deeper saving was invisible. No impulse calls to catalog companies, no friction-free spending. For a teenage daughter in 1987 who watched English schoolmates spend hours on the phone, the empty hallway was a discipline her grandmother had built into the architecture of the house in 1934. The ban was formalized at the 1909 Ministers' Conference. The phone was a temptation the community had agreed to refuse together. Number 6. The school money lesson. Amish children learn arithmetic in a one-room schoolhouse from a 16-year-old teacher. You stood at a chalkboard at age 10. You calculated bushels, hay yields, and feed costs out loud. A 1978 8th grader could figure a hay yield faster than most English college freshmen. For a 14-year-old girl about to leave school to apprentice in her mother's kitchen, the chalkboard was the operating manual for the household she would eventually run. The school was a financial system being taught in chalk. Number 5. The wedding without debt. A 1965 wedding cost the host family $90 in cash outlay. Food came from the family's own stores. Dishes were borrowed from the church. The bride's dress was sewn from $7 of fabric. You served 300 guests on borrowed benches in a cleared-out barn. For a bride wearing a dress her mother had finished at 3 a.m. the night before, the wedding was the public declaration this marriage would begin debt-free and remain so. The wedding was a community refusing to start a marriage in the red. Number 4. The father's workshop hours. After supper, an Amish father went to the workshop. You repaired harness from 7 to 9. You built small wooden items until 10. A 1983 family earned an extra $1,200 a year selling at Saturday market. For a son who fell asleep each night to the sound of his father's hand playing in the room below, the workshop was the lullaby of a household that had learned no money ever arrived without a second hour earning it. The workshop was a second farm running inside the first one's barn. Number 3. The invisible wealth rule. No Amish family displays money, ever. You wore the same plain dress for 11 years. You drove the same buggy your father drove. The successful furniture maker dresses identically to the struggling tenant farmer. A bishop in 1996 told a young man whose buggy lamp was slightly fancier than the ordnung allowed, "Wearest psyched, verliertes. He who shows it, loses it." The young man removed the lamp. For a grandmother who had quietly saved $400,000 across 40 years and would die without anyone outside her household knowing, the plain dress was a fortress. The rule was first codified in the 1632 Dordrecht Confession. It was a fortress built out of the appearance of having nothing extra. Number 2. The father's ledger. Every Amish father keeps a small ledger. Income on the left, expenses on the right. Updated every Sunday evening. You wrote in pencil. You showed the book to no one except eventually the son who would inherit the farm. A 1947 ledger from near Intercourse, Pennsylvania, recently donated to a historical society, contained 51 years of weekly entries in the same hand. For the great-grandson who finally read those entries in 2019, the book was a man explaining his entire life, every sacrifice, every gap, every quiet victory, to a grandson he would never meet in numbers. Number 1. Spend less than you earn. That is the whole rule. None of the 24 rules above mean anything without this one beneath them. Amos Stoltzfus earned $3,100 a year from his dairy in 1953. His family spent $2,200. The $900 gap, defended every week for 51 years, paid for the farm, raised 8 children, replaced the buggy twice, and filled the wooden box under the milkhouse floor with $186,000 in cash. There was no trick beneath the rule. There was a gap. Amos held the gap open for half a century, and the gap built everything. It is the most boring sentence in any language. It is also the sentence the Amish bishops of Lancaster, Holmes, and Elkhart counties have been quietly enforcing for 170 years. None of these rules required prosperity. They required a community willing to hold a fence line against the credit revolution, and willing to enforce it on each other when one family began to drift. The Amish did not get lucky. They got disciplined, and they got disciplined together. The rest of America industrialized, urbanized, financed, refinanced, and borrowed against tomorrow until tomorrow stopped being able to pay. The Amish did none of that. They watched it happen from a buggy on a country road, and they kept their wooden boxes under their floorboards, and they kept the gap open every Friday night at the kitchen table with a small ledger and a stub of a pencil. The math is still there, the boxes are still there, the bishop still enforces the rule, and the farm still gets paid for in cash.